First of all, thank you all so much for being here. I honestly, I never take for granted, what is it today? Thursday? Wednesday?
Yes.
Wednesday.
I know you've been touring a lot, but yes.
Yeah, no, but truly, I never take this for granted. I know there's a million things going on in life and politics and everything, and so truly, I'm so grateful for all of you, and I'm very excited to have this conversation. And I specifically really wanted to have this conversation with you because of what Radio Campesina represents, and because of the voice that Radio Campesina has been for this community for many years, and particularly the role that you all are playing in combating mis and disinformation, which I think affects every single one of us in this room. And so, thank you. We're more busy than I
am. Welcome everybody. Good evening. Buenas noches. Paola, welcome to La Finiquera or Arizona. We love you here. We respect your work a lot, and I mean, your bio is just half of what you are. So,
but before we start, I do have to say I have been traveling a lot and wearing suits, and then when I landed here, I was like, you know what? This feels like home. I'm not even gonna do it. And so sorry and thank you at the same time. But I do this. I feel every time I land here, it's like it feels so good.
So in honor to you, I'm wearing the pinnacle, which is your style, okay? I just did it for you tonight. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about this amazing book, and especially the title. How that came about?
So it's gotten a lot of pushback because it is, so the pushback was around this idea that it's too aggressive, no? But really defectors is supposed to be a play of words. So defectors obviously means the idea of abandoning a presumed loyalty to something. And so, as you know, as we know, for so many years and decades, the idea was always that Latinos, Hispanics were always loyal to the Democratic Party. And that is how our families voted. That was the sort of theory of change that was baked into Democratic politics. That as the community was growing, that community would be at the heart of the Democrats' multiracial, multi-ethnic coalition. That was what solidarity was supposed to always look like. And so here we are facing an election where, regardless of people's politics, the reality is that someone like Donald Trump that is promising mass deportations every single day, that someone like him is polling anywhere between 35% to 40% with Latinos. And so the idea of defecting is actually not to sort of presume that people are defecting from the Democratic Party, but for us to pose collectively this question of, when you put politics aside and you give people an opportunity to decide, when you think of the way that this community has shifted and evolved and changed, who are we loyal to? Who truly, like who when you sort of close the blinds and no one's looking at you, like who are we supposed to be loyal to? And so really it's a play of words, and it's to open a conversation around what's happening.
And really, what made you decide on the topic? What triggered you? I'm sure you do a lot of stories that maybe you're like, this is coming back and back and back. What triggered you?
The idea, I started thinking about it when I was still in politics. In 2016, I had that little fancy title of Deputy Director of Hispanic Press. And so much of that campaign, of the Hillary Clinton campaign, the story went, and our bosses told us that, and the numbers showed it, and the surveys told us, and I'm sure we also thought the same thing, that sort of Latinos would be responsible for Secretary Clinton's success. And that as Donald Trump was coming down the escalator, and as he was saying those things that he said, which we don't have to repeat, that for sure 100% the polls were indicating that because of that, Latinos would show up in these unprecedented numbers. I mean, it was so baked into our psyche that I remember like 2 weeks before the election, I mean, literally everyone was like talking about our jobs. Like, what job are you gonna get? And when are you moving to DC? And who's gonna be the press secretary? Like that is how much we believed it. And then come November 2016, not only does Donald Trump win, but less than 50% of the community shows up. And there's many ways to sort of dissect that and what happens and not, but in that moment, I do start to say, okay, like, what worked and what didn't work. And then come November 2020, after those 4 years of Trumpism, after the whole country sees family separation, zero tolerance policy, after we all witnessed that Trump again starts making very small inroads, but he makes inroads, anywhere between 8 to 10 points better with Latinos in 2020 compared to 2016. And so once that happens, and then once I really start crisscrossing the country, doing other stories, I think the difference is that when you think of sort of the Latino MAGA image, sort of the Proud Boys comes to mind, or Moms for Liberty, and these like very specific images come to mind. But I am finding, and this is up for debate, we'll have a discussion about this, I am finding that those conversations are happening in corners where you wouldn't even think about. This idea of warming up to the mass deportations and building the wall and Christian nationalism, and the way that this sort of transphobic language is now traveling with a lot more ease, anti-blackness, like all of that I see in my face a lot more. So that really is what prompts me to be like, all right, let me be crazy and write a book.
You crazy? So we know that you highlight different stories.
Yeah.
Which story did it impacted you more and why? From the stories that you highlight in the book.
I'm thinking. All of them, and I'll tell you why later. But the one that comes to mind was this guy that I interviewed. Well, there's so many, but I'll give you two examples. One is Mario Presents. That's his sort of online name, and he was very involved, and he was an organizer in this group called Gays Against Groomers, one of the culture work groups that emerged after COVID, very much driven by this idea that the Democratic Party is indoctrinating children to be queer and to be trans. And he is an openly gay person that has Mexican immigrant parents, but the way that he talked with so much shame around his identity. And so when I remember talking to him and feeling both this like very familiar feeling and also this initial gut of trying to sort of push back around everything he said, what was familiar, and I think that's sort of the through line with all these characters, whether I'm talking to the Proud Boys, or I'm talking to Moms for Liberty, or I'm talking to pastors, that fundamentally disavow of who I am or who my friends are, the through line is that we had something in common. The shame that he felt coming out was very similar to the initial shame that I have felt, in the early ages of my life coming out to my Mexican family. And then somewhere along the line, I found safety and community, and he sort of found this belonging and community in this extremist group. And so that was a weird feeling for me to have. I think initially you go into these interviews really knowing that you're going to push back and knowing what to sort of question and with your own sort of preconceived biases, but then to humanize people that fundamentally disagree with you is really hard, and he triggered that in me. It's not a good or a bad thing, but it was a feeling that doesn't come often in those sort of hostile situations.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does a lot. And so, in your second one?
The second one. Well, I mean, I think it's never, and I don't have to tell anyone in this room, but you never get used to sort of communities and folks at the border that are very, very sort of resonating with Trump's anti-immigrant rhetoric, and I never get used to that. And so there was one individual in Texas, Anthony Agüero, and I spent a lot of time with him one day in his car, like for 6 or 7 hours. And essentially, Anthony Agüero, online, sort of casts himself as this independent journalist, and he just spends hours every single day driving up and down, typically by El Paso. And so much of his content is based around casting asylum seekers and migrants as criminals that are fundamentally threatening the United States and threatening our cultural values and threatening people like him. And what was interesting then was in the way that he really tried to, in his language, differentiate himself, the son of Mexican immigrants, a brown man, in the way that he really tried to let me know that he wasn't one of them, which I was really like struck by. In every single sentence, it was like, that's not me, that's not who I am. They're criminals, not me. For me to then remind him that he has a long criminal record. And then after that, for him to once again reinforce that idea, that Trumpism sort of is what makes him feel in the in-group and not an out-group. So that never gets old. And I think that's kind of what I'm talking about. He may seem like an extreme example, but there's an element of that, I think, that is becoming more normalized.
Yeah, makes sense. So what is it that you want the readers or the people that will listen to the audiobook, because there's audiobook as well.
Don't read it, but
yes. What do you want them to reflect, to take away after finishing the book?
I mean, I think there's an easy explanation to what's happening, and you can explain everything through just saying that this is like the Trump effect, that Trumpism is sort of the driving force behind this very small but growing group of Latinos that are choosing him. We can do that, but I think the harder part, the more interesting part, what I try to do in the book is let's put the politics to a side and have the more uncomfortable conversations that I wish I would have had decades ago. Let's talk about the racial baggage. Let's talk about the internalized racism. Let's talk about the colorism, which I sort of bucket in the pillar of tribalism. Then let's talk about why transphobia and the anti-LGBTQ sentiment works so well among some of us. Let's talk about what it means to sort of carry the weight of colonialism, which I know seems so abstract and some people laugh when I bring it up, but like the weight of that and the way that has sort of shaped our moral values, like we never sort of unpack that. And then finally, again, the political trauma. So much of the research that I did, the beauty of what I did is that, as you know, as reporters, like we go in and out of these stories and then we leave. You never have time to like think about what happened or make sense of it or analyze it. And so the beauty was talking to psychologists and historians and scholars that really grounded me in the context. To have them tell me, look, when we come to this country, 70% of us migrate with traumas, with political traumas, and that trauma is passed through generations. So again, what does all of that mean? So a very long answer to say that to truly believe that we're not monolithic requires us to understand, not us, but the system, parties to understand that we're very complex human beings, and you can take absolutely nothing for granted, and that requires humanizing. And there's ways to do it, and so all I really ask for is the curiosity to understand the why.
Yeah. So, talking about leadership, how do you think it will impact the next generation of leaders, having this type of new change in our community culture and landscape?
Like if this, well, I mean, I think this election will be crucial, because and then suddenly in this election we'll understand if those 8 to 10 points that Trump gained, like, was that an anomaly? Maybe it was just an anomaly, or did that sort of signify a larger shift? And I think that's sort of the question, and I can't wait to talk to you all about this to see what you think. But I think this is a question that has been coming up almost in every city. And it's the question of, is what we're seeing simply the Trump effect? Or does this signal like a fundamental shift in the community that can persist after Trump leaves in office? There's many surveys out there, but one of them that I keep thinking about was this Telemundo poll that came out 2 weeks ago. And essentially, it shows you that when you ask the community just across parties, who is a better leader, who's more skilled, who do you trust more, it's still Kamala Harris, like overwhelmingly. The margins are super wide. And then when you start to ask, and which party best represents your values, for the first time in a long time, those margins are now starting to shrink significantly. And that to me signals that Trump is a symptom maybe of something bigger. And again, and I want to be, I hate being an alarmist. I'm not trying to be like, this is, there's nothing alarming about this, but it is, I think we do a disservice if we don't dissect what that means and what is that symptom. Because I think the idea of coming back from these sentiments to me is very hard. Like, how do you come back, from sort of leaning and seeing yourself reflected in Trumpism, and then, and I don't know, like, what does it mean to sort of walk back, and sort of center your values? I don't know what that looks like. And so to answer your question, I have no idea.
I thought you had it all covered, lady.
No, but I think that's the interesting thing.
Hard,
If
it's hard.
2045 or 2050 or 2070 was supposed to look a certain way, based on certain values, based on this idea that, we had this allegiance that would take this country to sort of defend X social values, then if there are sort of defections in that model, then what does that mean? And I think that's up for debate.
Yeah. Well, we want to thank you for, going through this research, and I think it's the first book that brings this type of topic, and it's up to date.
There are incredible scholars.
She's trying to be humble.
No, but it's true. Nothing that I do is possible without voices like
Yes.
yours, people in the community. So the book is a culmination of all of that, and I'm not just saying.
Thank you for putting it together.
Sure.
To really help us, it helps us open up for eyes, and sometimes we need that, like you said, we need to talk about uncomfortable conversations.